Welcome. This is Bill from BCUMC, and this is week 7, day 1. It's July 4th, so happy 4th of July to everybody. This is the Gospel of John study, and we're going to look at John chapter 12 for this week. So today is day 1, so we're going to look at John chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. So let's hear what's going on in this passage.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As the keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there, and came not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him.
Okay, so now let's take a look at the commentary regarding this passage. I'll be reading from the book, The Gospel of John, beginning on page 90. Understanding the Word. We are told that the meal depicted in John 12 is given in honor of Jesus, doubtless because of what he had recently done for the family. We are told more specifically that while Martha serves, see Luke chapter 10, Lazarus reclines with Jesus. This was the normal protocol. The head of the household would recline on a couch with the chief guest. It is important to compare John chapter 12 verse 2 with John chapter 13 verse 23, where we are told that Jesus is again reclining with a particular person, there said to be the beloved disciple. Now, for those who are simply listening to John 11 and John 13 in sequence, the normal or reasonable conclusion to draw would be that here we have two meals, each involving Lazarus and Jesus reclining on the same couch. It is not impossible that John chapter 13 verse 23 refers to someone else as the beloved disciple, but in light of John chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, one would have expected further explanation if someone other than Lazarus was meant. But no such explanation is forthcoming in John 13, and furthermore, nothing is said in John 13 about the sharing of a Passover meal either. And by the same token, nothing is said in the synoptics about Jesus washing feet at the Last Supper. I would suggest that this is because the meal recorded in John 13 transpired earlier in Passover week, just like the one in John 12. In fact, John 13 verse 1 says rather generically that the meal transpired before the Passover festival, not during Passover or as a Passover meal, but before the entire festival. This explains as well why there is no reinterpretation of the Passover elements in John 13. No, this is my body, this is my blood. In fact, the Gospel of John no more records the Last Supper than it records the Transfiguration. It chooses other events to record. We will say more about John 13 in next week's sessions. Having sorted that out, we need to concentrate on the extravagant act of love performed by Mary. She pours a whole pint of nard on Jesus. No wonder why the Markan account says that it smelled up the whole house. In John, she pours the nard on Jesus' feet, in the synoptics on the head. But with that much quantity used, it could easily have been both. In any case, we are told that this much nard costs a whole year's wages of day labor, 300 denarii. The focus here is on the anointing of the feet, perhaps because Jesus is going to interpret this act as a memorial like one that would perform at a burial of a person. He interprets it in terms of his coming death, regardless of what would have been the intent of Mary, which we are not told. Judas immediately objects, saying it's a big waste of money, and the money could have gone to the poor. Here we have a negative editorial remark. Not only that Judas would later betray Jesus, but Judas was crass and didn't really care about the poor. He was a thief who loved money. This does comport with the 30 pieces of silver story well. We also learn that he was the treasurer of the 12 and not reluctant to dip into the communal funds for his own purposes. Jesus responds to Judas sternly, telling him to back off and let her keep or observe it, as she would have the occasion to use it when Jesus was actually buried. I'm sorry, let me reread that. Tells her to back off and let her keep or observe, as she wouldn't have the occasion to use it when Jesus was actually buried. So this could be interpreted as a prophetic burial act. It will be remembered that Jesus was buried in haste, as both Sabbath and Passover were coming quickly and the sun was going down. The female disciples who did see where he was laid had no time to pay their respects with the linens and the oils and spices, and neither would Mary have been able to do so. Jesus' famous saying about the poor you will always have with you should certainly not be taken as some sort of cynical remark justifying the neglect of the needs of the poor. Jesus himself had on numerous occasions attended to such needs and could never have implied that. What he was saying was this was a special occasion and he wouldn't be around for a while longer, and so it was appropriate. There would always be more times to help the poor. The passage closes with a remark about the people coming to gawk at Lazarus because they had heard he had been raised from the dead, which precipitated a further frantic plan of the authorities to do away with Lazarus as well. Of course, this is profoundly ironic, because if God could raise Lazarus once, he could raise him twice. Killing Jesus or Lazarus was not going to stop God's will for either of their lives, as it turns out. So now let's reflect on the questions for this passage. Question number 1. When you compare the 3 accounts in Mark, Matthew, and John of the anointing, what similarities and differences do you note? Question 2. Did you note the irony in the Markan account, which fails to give Mary's name, but suggests she will be remembered forever wherever the gospel is told? Question 3. What we make of Judas and his actions during the last week of Jesus' life is important, right up to and including his own suicide. Do you think Jesus would have had the same forgiveness for Judas as he had for Peter or even the bandit on the cross? Well, until tomorrow, I hope you've enjoyed today's reading. And tomorrow we're going to look further into John chapter 12. We're going to go verses 12 through 19. So until then, happy 4th of July. Tune in tomorrow.